Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio's Raiders of the Unknown. Today's guest is Father Tom Saunders. How do you feel about being called Father?
In the English sense, because I'm in the Anglican tradition, uh, I was ordained as a presbyter, which, of course, in Greek is elder, and father is just a term for elder. Some people have an issue with that because Jesus said, "Call no man father," but he also said, "Call no man master," which is what we used to call teachers. If anybody calls me father, I just think of it as an elder in the church, not as a replacement for God the Father, if that's helpful.
But since our last conversation, weren't you?
Yes, I am an Anglican priest. Yes, was ordained a year ago in June.
So my
But
friend who, go ahead.
I've been in ministry for a long time before that, though. It's just this was a new turn in ministry.
So my friend who's a Indian Orthodox priest, he had to become a deacon first, and then when he got married, he was able to become a priest. In the Anglican tradition, you said you were a presbyter or whatever, and then a priest. Are you still both, or did you
Well,
change the titles?
well, I was a deacon, and presbyter is synonymous with priest. So when I was ordained as a presbyter, that was also as a priest. They're synonymous in the Anglican tradition.
Okay. And then there's the Presbyterians, and the Presbyterians, everybody's that, or only the reverend?
The reverend is what's called a teaching elder, and they use the same term presbyter, but they also have what they call, I'm not sure if they use this term anymore, ruling elders or administrative elders, which form the board of the church. And they are equal in status, but one is the teacher, the others are the administrators of the congregation. Um, Usually, though, only the teaching elders receive any kind of salary or payment for what they do.
Okay, and for those in our audience, the reason that we're going through that is because we're gonna get back to traditional Christianity and what are the concepts and ideas that are um, living on the tradition of Jesus and the apostles, and what are the things that are going off. I know you and I had a heart-to-heart conversation about Charlie Kirk and how unjust and devastating his death was, but I don't know if you've come across the clip where somebody was asking him about politics and religion, and he reinterpreted the passage from, I think it's Matthew, where Jesus tells Peter that on this rock I will build my church. And
Mm-hmm.
he had the most creative and wild interpretation. He said that the word ecclesia, which means like an assembly,
Yes.
that it actually meant a governmental institution like the ones that the Romans had. So Jesus was telling Peter to pretty much start a political party. It was the weirdest thing I ever heard.
I've not heard that, but I would not doubt it. And let me just say real quick that whatever someone believes, um, even if it's kind of made up out of thin air, which let me tell you that was, if they want to believe it, that's fine. However, we in the church and we in citizenry have to have an answer for that stuff. We just can't let that stuff go. The ecclesia was originally when the different Greek city states wanted to do more or less pure democracy. When there was a call for a vote in the Greek city states, there's a root word from Greek, and if I remember it right, and my Greek's really rusty, but the KLA or KLE root, which means to call, and ecclesia means those called out. Well, the assembly was those called out to vote on the issues of the day. Now, again, that language evolves, as you know, and that evolved just to mean assembly. And I can't recall if in the Septuagint the gatherings I think they just used the term synagogue, which is a Greek word for, the Jewish gathering places. But it came to mean any gathering. It wasn't just a political gathering. And while it had been a political gathering originally, that is not what Jesus said. Um, Most of Jesus' followers that fell away, and even some of the 12, were waiting for him to become a political Messiah. And he had to keep telling them, no, that's my kingdom is not of this world. Um, he did not ever say that he was going to establish in this uh, dispensation, we'll say, or in this epoch of history, that he would establish a um, political entity. Now, there is some, depending on how you view Christian prophecy, there is the belief that someday, when there's a new heaven and new earth, Jesus will come and reign as a king. Um, but that is not for the current part of history. And all through the New Testament, we see it, the words of Jesus reflected in what he said about not starting a kingdom of this world. And I can go into that a little later as we get going, but Christianity was never to be a political movement. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can go into that as we move along, but it was not ever to be a political movement. And some say when Constantine adopted Christianity in the 300s, it actually damaged the faith rather than enhanced the faith by making it part of the Roman, making it the established religion of the Roman Empire at that time.
Well, we have to break down the terms because religion wasn't even a thing back then. That's the category that was created later.
Mm-hmm.
Political systems weren't what we see them as now. Like, a lot of the conflict right now in Israel and Palestine has to do with political movements and nationalistic movements of the 1930s. And then back then, kingdoms were all theocratic in some sense because it was a divine right and there was no like there would be competing people who wanted to be kings, but it was established in a different way than nowadays. There was no vote, or the vote was limited to some people, like in the Greeks. So American Christianity, uh, I've been very disappointed. When I first came to America or the U.S., there was this idea that the U.S. was not only a beacon of freedom, but that the religious communities in America had the ability to confront politics, to kind of like the Martin Luther King thing, like they were the conscience of America versus being institutionalized. And and then as you're saying, the Holy Roman Empire was the institution that forced or even people who did not agree with the beliefs. And that's what we were fleeing from in Latin America, where there's still a lot of almost medieval uh like coercion uh
Mm-hmm.
with the masses. And then you have I didn't learn about uh the other extreme on the other side, which is liberation theology, which twists the words of Jesus similarly to what we were saying and makes him some type of political revolutionary. And now you're fighting um government institutions through religion, when what they should really be fighting is the religion that supports those institutions. So it's very strange and very weird what people do with faith and politics and how they mix it together. And that's going on in the Middle East as well. So when you have seen the the growth of Dominion Christianity, of evangelical um like groups like the family and things like that, where they think that they can um like almost, it's not even evangelize, they want to like control the political powers and kind of recruit politicians to sell their version of. How does that make you feel as a man of faith, someone who just like me, we have progressive ideas on some spectrum, but then we have traditionalists on others, but we see this distortion of what is supposed to be a pacifist movement of Jesus, and not only that, but like you're saying, a spiritual um, theocracy, like you're submitting yourself to God, you're not submitting yourself to individuals. Is it because these institutions want to be more prevalent, they want more members, they want more money, or are they doing it because they have these apocalyptic ideas that they want to bring it about through some type of coercion through political means? Like, what do you think is overall happening with these groups?
You bring up some very good points, and you hit the nail on the head with when you mentioned liberation theology. Uh, 40 plus years ago, 50 years ago, when liberation theology became uh, something that evangelicals might be aware of if they were in a seminary or a academic environment, uh, because it was Marxist, they would condemn it roundly because they saw it as a perversion of Jesus' teaching. However, because of the socialization of uh, a lot of fundamentalists and Protestants, they had difficulty admitting that by the same token, some of their thoughts and some of their polemics were a corruption in a different way. And I was fortunate at that time to be at a seminary that had an Anabaptist background. And, for some Reformation Christians and Roman Catholics, Anabaptists are a dirty word because they would rebaptize after people came to faith. They didn't see the validity necessarily of infant baptism, and there was a big fight over that. However, because of that, the Mennonites and the Brethren and some of the other Anabaptist groups, some of them went way out of line, and I'm blanking on the city where they took over and actually tried Christian nationalism. But the main bulk of them were persecuted by the Lutheran and Catholic governments in Europe. So they wound up in Pennsylvania, which is where you see a lot of Amish and Mennonites. And so American Anabaptist groups are a little more suspicious of government involvement than, say, your Southern Baptists or some of your other more traditional American churches. Um, I think a lot of socialization had to do with that in some groups. Now, when you talk about the eschatological or the end times, where people, want to force the end times to come, so Jesus will come back. In my upbringing, my socialization as a believer, um, those people were afraid of the government, not necessarily anti-government, but they were very cautious about the government. And we're talking 50, 60 years ago, because they felt that the government would be part of the one world persecution of Christians. Now, in the last 40 years, 45 years, let's say, basically from the late 70s to the current, that has flipped around a lot. And a lot of these groups that were at, at, at best ambivalent towards the government and at worst terrified of the government have now joined with a lot of these Christian nationalist um, currents, I would say. And I think a lot of that does go back to the persecution complex. We heard, and you've heard this too, David, where a lot of white evangelicals have complained that they're being persecuted against. Well, there was a socialization in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that we would face horrible persecution. And when I say persecution, to me, there has to be a bar. I would say some Christians in Nigeria currently are persecuted because they're losing their lives and their land and their property. Modern American Christians are not being persecuted, but they have this persecution complex that came from those thoughts about the end times and prophecy and all that. And now they've joined with these Christian nationalist groups as a form of wanting protection. It doesn't necessarily make sense because all that stuff was supposed to usher in the second coming of Jesus. But also it does make sense if people are afraid. So they feel that if they join with the current government and the current movement of nationalism, they will be protected, which I think is a very thin assumption. I wouldn't assume that if I were them. I certainly don't assume it myself. So some of that is where it's come along. In the 70s, there was this inferiority complex among evangelicals because they look goofy compared to your mainstream Christians and your university intellectuals. And I was socialized in that time period too, where there was a bit of an inferiority complex. And if someone, let's say a celebrity, I remember in the mid to late 70s, Bob Dylan had his born again period. And oh boy, did they ever try to milk that as much as they could. Bob Dylan was a Christian now. Well, I don't want to say what Bob Dylan believes or not, but I don't think it was the same white Christian evangelicalism that they thought it was. Same thing when the band U2 from Ireland came to popularity and 3 of the 4 members proclaimed to be Christians. All of a sudden, oh, we're not so inferior. We got some cool people on our side. Well, I think this is all, some of that is all culminated now in we run things. We white nationalist Christians now run things. So we're the cool kids. And you see that with people like Benny Johnson, Charlie Kirk, to a lesser degree, someone like Michael Knowles or something like that. You see that Knowles is a Catholic, so he's not so concerned about the evangelical inferiority complex, but it coming from that world, and this is not scientific or scholarly, this is just my observations as someone who grew up in that world. There's probably a lot of happiness in that we're now the kids at the cool kids table, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to keep that. Does that make some sense to you?
Yes, and I'm torn because my and Orthodox friends were big fans of Joe Rogan and what's that guy, the psychologist from Canada?
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson, because they saw it as a cultural war that the progressives had become so militant that they were destroying freedoms, and it's a backlash against this idea that they're going to police your thoughts, they're going to police your posts, they're going to police every. And now the Jewish community and the evangelicals are the ones policing everybody else, and using this type of paranoia and almost like a um, satanic panic, that anybody that disagrees, doesn't like them, or holds negative views about them and their friends, that they need to be hunted down, humiliated, and fired, and canceled, and all this stuff. So we live in a very polarized world, and nobody's consistent. Nobody is like virtuous and honorable in the way they go doing things. Whatever happened to the idea that vengeance is the Lord, and persecution leads you to inner strength and resilience? Now everybody wants to trash everybody else and destroy them. Do you think we'll ever get out of that cycle?
I don't know. It could be a function of human nature. It could be a function of that we have divided ourselves so deeply that no. You think about people who get into blood feuds in different tribal societies or clan societies, and blood feuds go on for generations, and people hate each other and they don't even know why. I unfortunately think we're kind of at that point. Paulo Freire, the liberationist educator, he was sort of lumped alongside of the liberation theologians. He was more of an educator than a theologian. But one of my favorite quotes from him, even though I disagree with his Marxist foundations, was that there's a vicious cycle of the oppressor becoming the oppressed, and then the oppressed oppressing the past oppressor. And it's a vicious cycle of whoever gets power. When he was in touch with some Marxist guerrilla group in Brazil, and they took over a big, I guess we would call it in Spanish, a hacienda, or a big farm ranch. And initially they had the owners tied up in a gunpoint, and some of the revolutionaries had actually worked for the owners in the past. And they had to take away those people because when the owners barked orders at these men who were holding machine guns, they got scared and ran away. However, within a short time, they were oppressing the owners the same way they had been oppressed. And I think perhaps it's part of human nature, vicious cycle, but we don't see those things quite as fiercely in some other societies. You think of some of your more placid Scandinavian societies. At least we haven't seen that yet there. There's been some violence in those places, but it is frightening. You know, you don't know how far is it going to go. Because one of these days, the other side will get into power. And what's the side that's in power now going to do? Are they going to ratchet it up a notch and become more violent? I don't know. I fear for that. And part of when I talk to people in ministry about these things, part of my goal is to say, listen, the United States of America is in a cold civil war right now. And you don't want to see what happens when it becomes a hot civil war. Let's all on either side start to get rational. Let's go back to our constitutional principles. Let's go back to being thankful for what some people would call progressive movements. The old term would have been liberal, enhancing freedom. Someone like Kristi Noem or Pam Bondi or Tulsi Gabbard, those women would not be where they are without the liberal reforms on women's rights that happened over the last 55 years. And so one has to respect what brought us to this point. But I think we need to go back to our constitutional foundations as interpreted by the courts and as modified by amendments and modified by federal law and say, okay, we're going to agree again that this is where we belong. This is how we work together. And the Constitution does not allow for theocracy. It does not allow for Christian nationalism. It does not allow for Article 6 does not allow for a religious test in holding federal office. You can't limit the presidency to Protestant Christians, or you can't forbid someone of a certain religious group from assuming an office if they win that office fair and square through free and fair elections. And although the Constitution is not a Christian document, it is the contract we've made with each other, with its changes and with enhancements and interpretation. And I think for a start, we should go back to that, all of us, and say, for those who are, especially for those who are fomenting Christian nationalism, the New Testament and the Constitution do not make any room for that. So let's go back to our documents that we hold on to and be honest and say, we can't do that if we're going to agree to these documents as Christians, the New Testament, or as Americans and Christians, the Constitution. So it prohibits that thing. That's kind of my solution if people would want to get back to it.
So Tom,
As
before we
Christians.
move on, Tom, before we move on to the two characters we want to discuss, which are Joel Weeben and Doug Wilson, can you tell us about the development of having a female Anglican bishop, and when did women get ordained in your tradition?
Women are not ordained in the fragment of Anglicanism that I am in. And there is provision in England for the more conservative Anglicans to have oversight by male bishops. That was part of the compromise when women were allowed to be consecrated as bishops in England. So some parishes have chosen to opt out because they interpret the New Testament as saying that women cannot be in ministry or authoritative positions. St. Paul says that in Timothy and Titus, and one place in 1 Corinthians. However, other groups have interpreted that as a cultural mandate for that time, not for all of Christianity. The fragment of Anglicanism that I am in sees that as a mandate for all time. And if women have approached me and said that they feel a call to ministry, and I say, well, you might want to look at a different denomination or a different jurisdiction of Anglicanism to do that. The consecration and vote of Sarah Mullally as the Archbishop of Canterbury is something completely new and unprecedented. There will be some people who are overjoyed by it. What's called the Southern Cone of Anglicanism, being mainly sub-Saharan Africa, parts of India, small portions of Latin America, have rejected her as the first among equals. Traditionally, the Archbishop of Canterbury was not like a pope, but was considered the first among equals within the overall Anglican communion. Some have rejected it outright. Some, while rejecting it, have sent her congratulations and best wishes, but sorry, we're not going to be part of this. Of course, the Episcopalian Church in the United States, which is still in communion with Canterbury, was very, very favorable towards her election, and it's a mixed bag among Anglicans. Now, the ordination of women has taken place in the Episcopalian Church in the United States since the late 70s. Some Anglicans split off from the Episcopalians, ordain women, some don't. Again, it's that interpretation of St. Paul's prohibition on women teaching, whether that's cultural for the time or a mandate for all time. And I am one who feels that people should attend where they're comfortable. They should pursue the churches that fit with their belief system. And when we disagree, we'll be charitable to each other. But for many in the Anglican communion, I'm going to say especially Australia, Canada, US, England, New Zealand, some parts of Africa, probably South Africa, this is a very favorable thing. For some others, it's not going to be accepted, and it will cause some fractures within the Anglican community.
But she was ordained a long time ago by a more unorthodox group of Anglicans, and now she's the bishop?
No, she was rightfully ordained by the Church of England in 2015 under their canon laws at the time. So she was ordained legally under canon law in England 10 years ago. She's a very competent administrator. She was the head of nursing for the British National Health Service, which is no small job. Very accomplished to rise to that position. Took a career turn, and there is some criticism that her formation as a priest was at what some people consider to be a community college or a minor institution of theological training. To me, those things don't matter. What matters is the people who have the ability to vote her in and to do those things. And she has been legitimately ordained and consecrated all the way through according to the canon laws of the Church of
In a separate group.
I'm sorry?
Is your church considered Church of England, or is it a separate group from them?
It's a separate group. Our church split off from the Episcopalian Church in the 70s. I want to be careful how I say this. We are a bit more, we're a lot more conservative. We have been under different jurisdictions over the last few years. Unfortunately, our longstanding bishop passed away about 2 years ago. And he was a very gentle, kind, loving Christian man. He was more conservative in his theology, but he was one of the finest people I've ever known. Very kind, very loving, very thoughtful, and a very inclusive leader. our particular parish has often been administratively run by women. We have a church board that's called a vestry. I don't know why they use the term vestry. And for much of my history with the church, the senior warden, which is the senior administrative officer of the church, has been a woman. While the priesthood and diaconate are reserved for men, all other positions are available to women. And some of the more important positions in our church, treasurer, senior warden, junior warden, other committee heads of committees have been run by women. So under our old bishop, that was very much accepted and promoted, perhaps compromised. And he would have been a lot like me if a woman said, I wish to be ordained. He would say, well, go in peace. There are good churches that will ordain you. And that is not part of our tradition, but if you wish to do that, go in peace and all the best to you, don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thing. Because this church does interpret the mandate of male headship. Now, it sounds patriarchal, and maybe it is, in the church to be reserved for men. They see Paul's mandate as binding for all of history, not just for that time in the culture. However, women have always had a very important part of our parish and often made the very crucial decisions, financial and administrative decisions. So it's a little different.
The reason that we went on this a route of conversation is because the 2 to 4 people we're going to mention, they start with a premise, kind of like a traditionalist premise, like there's roles for men and women, there are family values that we support, and then they go off the rails, like if a black person enters, we expect them to act like a white person, and then they just keep on like and for our audience to get like an idea of what we're talking about, there's this guy Joshua Hames. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I think you and I talked about. I think I've only heard of him through you. Yeah.
So he's the ex-pastor of Peter Hexet, and then he has another guy named what's his name? There's another guy that works with him, and they start beating on everybody, and like to me, and I'm sure you would agree, the sign of a weak faith is that you feel threatened by everyone around you, and
Yes,
that
very much so.
and
Yes.
and that you push down on minorities, on people who have limited power to prop yourself. So, in this show, we talked a lot about Christian anti-Semitism, Muslim anti-Semitism, and it's always this idea that the religion cannot stand on its own, that it has to trash the last group or in our case, 1 or 2% of the population to prove something. And so what I don't understand is that it's not like there's droves of black people that want to join these crazy churches. It's not like the women in those communities want to become leaders. Like they already know that these guys are super hateful and dismissive. So they're beating it, like Paul would say, they're boxing with their shadow. They're picking fights with people that never had any interaction with them to begin with. Is it similar to xenophobia, where you hate the other but you don't even know the other?
I think there's a lot to that. One advantage to a lot of Anglicanism in the United States is that when more conservative Anglicans split from the Episcopal Church, they willfully went under the leadership of African bishops because the African bishops were more conservative. So at least on the racial side of things, for us to have an African bishop over us is not an odd thing at all. And bishops don't have absolute power, but they have quite a bit of influence. And you do vow to obey your bishop when you're ordained. One of my best friends here is with a different Anglican group, and until the ACNA, the Anglican Church in America, formed about 20 years ago, he was under a bishop from Rwanda, and very happy about that. Now, what you say about xenophobia, again, now I want to be careful, because one argument you hear from a lot of people is, well, that's not real Christianity when you hear these things brought up. They think they're real Christians, okay? The New Testament, and you know the New Testament as well as I do, the day of Pentecost, there were people from all over the known world. And one of the first converts to Christianity was an Ethiopian. I doubt if he was, a white guy with red hair. I doubt it. You see, neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek. The idea being that the door is open to anyone. Now, once we come in the door, we do submit ourselves to the moral precepts of the New Testament, most of which correspond very closely, if not almost identically, with the moral law of the Torah, not the ceremonial and civil laws of the Torah, but the moral law, for the most part. Christianity by its very nature should be an open door for whosoever will may come. You may come in a certain way. I had a Methodist professor in seminary say, "Come as you are, but you may not stay as you are. Not that you were forced to change, but you may come to a different moral outlook once you've come." So Christianity, as all religions, is aspirational, as far as we aspire to a certain level of morality and righteousness, a certain level of kindness and goodness. We don't always make it, and we admit we're broken, fallen, imperfect beings. But if we're going to call ourselves Christians, we should adhere to what the New Testament says about government, about other people, about loving people, about caring for people, about violence, all that stuff. And we've seen this cultural Christianity. Kristen Dumas, the historian who wrote Jesus and John Wayne, addresses these things very clearly. And sometimes I listen to her and I have to cringe, because she's so right about often her critiques of American evangelicalism right now. I'm not sure foundationally she and I would agree on everything, but she's so accurate about her critiques that I cringe, because I was part of that at one time, before I kind of realized that that's cultural Christianity, that's not New Testament Christianity. And I'll even go as far to say as Anglicanism is an expression of Christianity. It's not the only one true way. It's a preference, as far as I'm concerned, rather than the only way to practice the faith. Does that answer it, or did I go too far afield?
No, that's good. I appreciate you saying that they see themselves as Christians, because the biggest challenge to every group is, would you condemn, for us Jews, would you commend extremists in the Likud party who are saying hateful things about Gazans? In the Muslim community, would you condemn people who use terrorism as a means of political gains? And then in Christianity, every time that we say, hey, some wacko guy who wrote a manifesto saying that he was the biggest Christian in the world and hurt a bunch of people, would you ever condemn that guy? They would say, oh, well, he's not a Christian. He thought he was a Christian, or he was a cultural Christian, or he was a whatever. He was very confused. So they never take ownership to the idea that you can be radicalized within your faith in destructive expression, because they think they're the gatekeepers and only their version of Christianity is the true one. And I think that comes from a lot of the heretic hunting from the Byzantine Church and stuff like that, where you can always diffuse any heat towards your group by saying, well, those are separated brothers. But then there's the other element where, almost like in the Roman Catholic perspective, the church is pure, is a virgin, is untouched by human corruption. The individuals are the ones that can be corrupted. The individuals are the ones that can fall astray, but the church will never be tainted by bad behavior. And like you and I were talking privately about the Crusades, that is a cop out to never take responsibility. So how does Doug Wilson and these guys uh, claim that their version of Christianity, which is nationalist, will bring us to a better place when there's really no evidence of that ever taking place?
I, my opinion, and someone more scholarly, and again, I refer back to Kristen Dumais. Uh, she can give you and she has lectures on YouTube, and then her book Jesus and John Wayne. She can trace this historically back to a fairly recent phenomenon. A gentleman called Rousas Rushdoony was a Christian nationalist, and not only were people of his ilk wanting to uh, impose the moral law of the Torah and the New Testament as civil law in the United States, uh, there were actually civil laws from the Torah that he wanted to bring back, and that has become a thread. Now, that may, well, as any good historian will tell you, Christian nationalism is nothing new. You know that. You already mentioned, the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire really. But all those states were states with established religion, generally Catholicism or Orthodoxy in those days. Um, so I think a lot of it is your socialization. And Doug Wilson is not a stupid man. I'm going to say that. He's not a stupid man. I mean, somebody might throw out an invective, say he's an idiot just because they disagree with him. And I understand the difference between calling somebody an idiot because you disagree with them and saying someone's actually not smart. He's a very smart man. And I even will go as far as to say if he wants to say all this stuff, he has a right to say it as long as it doesn't rise to the point of insurrection or harm to self or others. Now, some will argue that others have been harmed in his community, but that's for a different conversation. Um, he is completely assured of his theology and philosophy of Christian nationalism. And he argues, and he's a little more, let's say, passive than some of them, than say a Joel Webb. And he will say that he wishes it to come about voluntarily, but he has a very definite Calvinist, Reformed, perhaps Presbyterian, and not all Presbyterians. Some Presbyterians are extremely progressive, some are extremely conservative, view of how government should be. And again, oftentimes with with people who aren't adherents to Wilson's philosophy and theology, when people say we should be a Christian nation, I'll say, well, what kind of Christian? Do you want to be a United Church of Christ progressive Christian nation, or do you want to be an independent fundamentalist Baptist hyper-conservative Christian nation? Christianity covers a lot, and I think Doug Wilson is so sure of his version of Christianity that he believes that it will work. It's almost it's a matter of faith, much like um, some Marxists. No matter how badly Marxism has failed in history, they still believe by faith that someday we will have the Marxist utopia. Well, on the same token, Christian nationalism honestly has failed all through history, and people still have this irrational faith that someday a Christian nation will rise and make everything perfect. Given the diversity in Christianity, I don't see how that would ever happen, to be
But
honest.
but do you think that is just a way of saying we hate Muslims and Jews? Because Joel was saying that anybody who's Jewish should not be allowed to be in government. And then of course, then they're gonna go after blacks, then they're gonna go against gays, they're gonna go against Asians and Latinos. So they fuse Christianity with whiteness. They fuse
Yes.
Christianity with tradition. I know that there's a huge movement of traditionalist Catholics that is coming about that is on par with Christian nationalism, and
Right.
they think that somehow their version is the best. And we can just look at the Puritans. I actually, since I'm Jewish, I actually feel that there are some civil things that have been misconstrued, like with the Inquisition and stuff like that. But there is this, I never think you can institutionalize morality, but I do believe that because we've become very loose on our legal system, the culture is kind of like getting to a place of instability. So
Hmm.
are they, where does it stop? Like that's the problem. Is like you talked about the checks and balances of the Constitution, you talked about the Gospels and the teachings of Paul. So the problem with Protestantism and even traditional Catholicism is that it's uh, become very subjective. So
Yes.
they
Yes.
can apply the rules when they want to and when they don't. And like you said, if Christianity was multicultural to begin with, they toss that out. And then they create this new Lord of the Rings where white people are good and dark people are bad that never existed. So it's a cultic kind of thing. It's not really legitimate in so many ways.
I would agree completely. And it's too simplistic just to say go back to the Constitution, go back to the New Testament for those of us who are Christians. However, I think a lot of I hate to say this, but I think it's true. I think in the last couple years, especially the last year, honestly, uh, one of my friends used to say that your bad side was showing. Like you let the veil drop a little bit, people saw your real face. I think some of these people, because they feel like they are in a position of safety and potential and partial control of the government, they feel free to express their true feelings now, which they probably always held. Uh, the racism, the anti-Semitism, the subjugation of women. I think they feel safe to let that out now, whereas uh, it wasn't proper in society to do that. Now I think they feel a freedom to do that. I think it's always been there in some of these groups. I think that thread of anti-Semitism and xenophobia has always been there. I grew up in a very fundamentalist home, but our type of fundamentalism had a very strong missionary ethos to go to other countries and reach other peoples. And my father, you knew my dad. He worked in an industry that had a lot of foreigners. And when we lived in the Northeast, many of his coworkers were Jewish, and our home always had foreigners, missionaries to other countries, Jewish people. They were always invited to our home. Now, my dad may have had the idea of converting them to Christianity. I don't know. I never saw him, and he was a very gentle soul. I never saw him put the pressure on anybody. But there was a joke at work that he worked so closely with another engineer that everybody said they were bar mitzvahed together. Uh, the guy was Jewish and dad wasn't. And because of those sort of things in my home, you never heard a shred of anti-Semitism. Our next door neighbors were Jewish. And my dad and mom always said that was part of our belief system, that we respected people who were other and we loved people who were other and we provided the best of ourselves to our neighbors who were other. Neighborhood in New Jersey had Jewish folks, had Catholic Italians, and in those days, folks were a little more divisive. But in my home, people came and went of all stripes, even though my parents would have been considered fundamentalists at the time. And of course, those were different times. In the 1960s, a lot of fundamentalists were Democrats uh, because they saw the civil rights movement. Some of them saw the civil rights movement as an appropriate Christian project to be part of. So I think it's always been there. It's an ugly part of history. It's an ugly part of human nature. I think some of these people honestly have always felt that way, and they just feel comfortable to say it now, unfortunately. I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Would you ever grace us with another hour of your time, or is that too much?
No, I can. I've got the time if you do. Yeah.
Okay, because I want to go down the actual beliefs of some of these people. Um,
Hmm.
a quick overview of Joel Weeben is that he thinks that black strangers are significantly more dangerous than white ones. He was teaching some kids about, he has a program called the Anglo-Protestant Project, where he says that non-Christians such as Hindus, Muslims, and Jews can be in the car, but they don't get to drive. So he doesn't want them to be in leadership. Uh, he says a lot of anti-Jewish things, excluding Jews from everything. Uh, he wants um people to be executed, uh, but not if it's rape, because we don't know if the women are telling the truth or not. Uh, just like I don't know if you heard when our vice president said that he didn't want women to vote. He wanted head of the household to vote only.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's very much part of Webben and Wilson's mentality. Yeah.
and then I still don't understand the general equity theonomy, an ideology that seeks to implement Mosaic law in modern civil government, includes theocratic dictatorship and second-class citizenship for non-Protestants. So we've had a lot of shows where we talk about how even the Bible is being misconstrued by a lot of these people, including some religious leaders in Israel. So they say that because of the way that is described, that they would just go in and destroy a, a town, that's, you know, that's precedence for doing that with your enemies. And then they, in this situation, they're saying that there was second class status for or non-members of the Israelites. And my friend who's very studious about the Torah, he says that there was a process of conversion or assimilation into the thing, and same thing with the whole process of servitude, that they could become members of the Israelites, so they were only servants for so many years. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they pick and choose and they misconstrue stuff from the Israelite kingdom. And that's what the Holy Roman Empire did. I was giving a presentation, I was saying the reason that the Inquisition was torturing people is not because they wanted to be like King David and Joshua, it's because they wanted to be like the Romans. And the
Yeah.
Romans always humiliated their enemies, like the Huns and whoever else, even Cleopatra and everybody. They would do a procession in the middle of the town and throw rocks at them and stuff.
Yeah.
So this idea that we're going back to biblical times, it's a misnomer, because even though they were brutal in biblical times and there's a lot of stuff to criticize, a lot of the things that now are being transferred to this idyllic thing where you have all Christians in power, it's made up. Like uh, there was a guy who was talking about the Assyrians and how in the Bible the Assyrians are but in the story of Moses and the Egyptians stuff like that, you see that even Egyptians joined the people of Israel at Sinai, and that there
Yeah.
was people from other nations that would become part of them, and they would have good relations with the Lebanese and things like that. And they skip all that and they say, no, we have to be just like them, hating everybody and killing everybody. Or like neo-Nazi Richard Spencer would say, we have to be like the state of Israel, where they're ethno-nationalists and they oppress all people around them, and the Israeli Arabs are second class citizens. And it's like you don't even know, Israeli history. You don't even understand the way that they manage. It's almost like a commonwealth in some ways, and in other ways, it's kind of complicated. But they don't even understand uh, the stuff. And like you said, they come up with these simplistic ideas, and then they go pushing around them. And don't they know that it's like a fool's errand, that their numbers are so small that they're just talking trash? It's kind of like the Candace Owens and the Nick Fuentes. Like, even though they're getting a lot of attention because they're the loudest voices, they're not building anything other than uh, destroying a lot. Like their hatred can only go so far. And the fear
Yeah,
of a lot of us is that they get in power, and then they start pushing the hatred even further. What would you say about that?
I have a lot to say about that. For one thing, we see how American Christianity, not all of it, okay, because American Christianity is incredibly diverse, politically, theologically, ethnically, racially. It's very diverse. So to say American Christianity, I'm saying of one segment of American Christianity has used the faith for profane pursuits. And when I say profane, I mean uh, twisting. Some people will even say it's the equivalent to taking the Lord God's name in vain. That you're using the faith for purposes other than God's purposes or Jesus, the purposes of Jesus. So, for one thing, a lot of these people have psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies. They want to be leaders, and the church or their particular church is their way to be someone important. And I don't apologize for saying that because I've seen that in small groups, large groups, everything. It's human nature. And anyone who's called to ministry needs to be a humble person. They can't be someone who wants to be a dictator. Now, circling back a little bit to why they can try to put the Mosaic laws on top of people as Protestant Christians, there was a movement in I think, the late 1700s and on through the 18 and early 1900s called British Israelism. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah, where they thought that the white Northern Europeans were the lost tribes of Israel and the true Israel, even though they had converted to Christianity. They were the true Israel. They were the true people of God. So you could plug in all those uh, ceremonial and administrative laws from the Torah and acquire them for your own power. And they believe that the current state of Israel is perhaps a legitimate state, but that God has no future purpose or interest in the Jewish people or the state of Israel. They believe they are the true Israel that God will bless, has blessed, and will continue to bless, and that the Jewish people and the state of Israel have been forgotten. There is no historical or theological or scriptural basis for that. It was just coming out of the anti-Semitism of Europe in the Middle Ages. There's no basis for it. There have been diverse groups who have adopted that, saying that we are now the true Israel, and it is our place to put God's laws over the people, and we will be the ones, we will be the high priests and the kings and the judges, and the nations will submit to us. And like you said, it's absolutely ridiculous because most of those groups are small. Even Joel Webben and Doug Wilson's groups are not very small. They may be growing, but they're small. They're not very large. I'm sorry. They may be growing, but they're not large groups. And nowhere in the New Testament, and again, that's what any Christian should go back to. Nowhere in the New Testament do you see that at all. Not at all. Now, there was a twist in theology that you and I talked about it last time we talked, when the development of dispensational theology grew up, where there were, in some thoughts of it, there were two covenants. There was the new covenant and the old covenant, and that God always had a plan for the Jewish people. So the people who grew up under that were less likely to be Christian nationalists because they believed that God was still using the state of Israel when it came into being in 1947, and or was it 48? I'm sorry. Uh, uh, when the state of Israel came into being, the modern state of Israel, they rejoiced because they thought that was a sign of the imminent coming of Jesus. And they have held very positive and very um, supportive views of Israel no matter what. And some of them have pulled away because of the Likud party and the current leadership in Israel. Some of them have backed off of that, but some have just intensified their support for the state of Israel currently under the current conditions, and see no problem at all with what the leadership in Israel is doing right now. My position is all people are equal before God. All people are loved. All people are cared for. God wants the best for everyone. So I don't see the Jewish people as inferior. I don't see them as superior. Neither do I see Christians as inferior or superior, whatever race or nationality they have. I believe in a radical equality of all people. So I cannot ascribe to these things, saying that we are now somehow it's almost like Hitler's idea of the Übermenschen, the super race or the master race. That's where that stuff comes from. Even though Hitler was, uh, he would use Christian language when he had to, but he was more of a pagan, I think, to be honest, historically. But a lot of Christians jumped right on his bandwagon because they believed that they were superior to the other people. And again, the same kind of thing with Webb. Maybe not so much with Wilson, but Webb definitely.
But let's go back to Jesus himself. So, if Jesus allowed himself to get scourged and falsely accused and crucified, where did they get this idea that his followers have to be in position of power? Because the Roman Catholic Church said in the medieval times that there was a new creation at the moment of the resurrection. So anybody that believes in Jesus became more than conquerors, and they could almost like in the Greek Orthodoxy that you can become deified, you can
Yes.
become spiritually renewed to the point of this is the millennium, this is the new kingdom. So they felt that um, he had placed authority over the apostles, and then anybody that followed the bishops and the pope, they were kind of like the new creation, the new kingdom. So that's where they felt the supremacy from. How can Protestants claim that other than saying that they're the elect, like Calvin would? Like, how can they create this type of nationalistic mentality where there was no true nation states back then? It was mostly kingdoms. There was no sense of government. Christians never governed over anybody when they were being persecuted by the Romans. They were the religion of the women, the slaves, and the infirm. How
Mm-hmm.
how did it get transformed from this ragtag group of people who are more spiritually minded than earthly minded to this obsession with power and in dominating other people?
And you've mentioned this too, that most historians would say when Constantine uh, supposedly or in reality became a Christian, he made Christianity the religion of the empire. And of course, all of a sudden, the bishops and the priests and the patriarchs of different cities were elevated to political positions. Um, I have no problem with anyone of any religion participating in our democratic republic, not whatsoever. Not my fellow Christians, not Jews, not Hindus, Muslims. I have no issue with that at all, because we are equal before God, and our form of government does not allow for religious preference in office, even though that's happened through cultural and electoral politics. where they got this idea was they wanted power. Again, this is my opinion, and there is some historical precedence for it. Um, and I don't want to go too far away from this, but there are people who claim to be Christians who aren't. Uh, I don't want to whitewash bad Christian movements in the past by saying, well, they weren't really Christians. I think John Calvin was a Christian, but Calvin's Geneva was a nightmare. It was a theocracy. It was a nightmare. It was horrible. I do believe John Calvin was a Christian, and I don't care how much his theology may have helped me in my understanding of faith, or how much his theology may be popular. I denounce Calvin's Geneva, and he was a Christian. I'm not going to say he wasn't. However, there are people who have used the faith just for their own power, and that's any faith, not just Christianity, have used the faith to get places where they wouldn't have gotten before under uh, governments that had established religion. The old joke in England was, if you're wealthy and one son goes to parliament, one son goes to the military, and the dumb son goes into the priesthood. That was the influential families of England. That's what they would say. Um, kind of sad that the dumb one went to the priesthood, but it was a power position. Uh, Religion, Christianity, all religions, but even Christianity has been used for false purposes. And I think some of these people are claiming Christianity when they don't really care a bit about it. It's just a step ladder to get where they want to be, or to get votes from a certain segment of society.
So I know we started a conversation with this shaming and persecution of independent ideas, even things that we hate, and how we despise that type of policing of perspectives. But the the issue that I see is that there is no shaming of negative behavior or uh, poor interpretation of scripture. When a kid who um, was he a Lutheran? I don't know if he was a Lutheran or Presbyterian. He went and shut up a synagogue. I had
Mm-hmm.
um, Michael Heiser on the show, and I was telling
Mm-hmm.
him, "Hey, would you condemn what he did?" And in his manifesto, he mentioned that he was a hardcore Christian and that he believed all the medieval conspiracies against the Jews and stuff like that. And he kept on saying, "No, well, just like there's many Jews who are ignorant of the Bible, this kid was an ignorant Christian, and we cannot claim him as one of our own." And and so I appreciate you, you know, educating us about how these groups are walking away from the path. In the time of Jesus, the idea of um, religious law and religious understanding was being developed, which is called the derech. That's why the early church was called the followers of the way. And then it
Mm-hmm.
became halakha, which is the daily practice, the religious practice under the leadership of the teachers at that time. The Essenes already had it, so there was a narrow path that was set forth for those who claim to be disciples of Jesus or any other rabbi. But now it's become so wide that people are scared to condemn anything, and they are incapable of standing up for anything. Um, and then they take moral issues or political issues, and they'll make a big deal about that. So they're like, we're angry at family values being watered down. We're angry at the school system. We're angry about this and that. But it's the so do you think it's the political um tactics that are being used within Christianity that are the problem? Because the latest political tactic is to be hateful, to
Yeah.
be so like irate that you get people to vote or to get them to move, that if you just preach normal peaceful stuff, nobody cares.
Well, here's what I'll say. Um, Again, I want to go back to the New Testament, and as an Anglican Christian, I can't find everything we do as our practice as part of the New Testament. So there are some things that are not counter to the New Testament, but they're not required either. They're more of a subcultural preference. However, I wear two hats right now. I'm working in a church, but I'm also a hospice chaplain. And as a hospice chaplain, I'm going to let people express their life story and philosophy and meaning as they see fit. If they ask me what I believe and we can have a kind and gentle conversation about it, I'm happy to do that. And I have. But as a pastor, I've had to denounce and condemn Christian behavior my whole career. Christians are do some pretty crummy things uh, in the name of Christ. And I do believe that there's something special about the faith. However, for the whole history of our faith, I mean, you've read the New Testament. A good chunk of it is correcting people's stupidity and non-Christian behavior. So when I say go back to the New Testament, I didn't see that as a perfect time period. I saw that as the leaders of the church and Christ himself calling out the unchristian things that people were doing so that they could get back on the path. So I have no trouble at all when I see someone who claims to be a Christian doing something unchristian, denouncing that. And okay, let's say somebody is the mayor of a town and they're a deacon in the church, and everybody considers them a great Christian person. There was a mayor of a town in I believe it was Mississippi recently who got caught extorting a male prostitute that he had hired. And all of a sudden, he's not the mayor anymore, and he's not the pastor of the church in the town. I have no problem saying that man is a Christian, and I have no problem saying he's wrong. Just like I would want somebody, and people have told me, Tom, you're a Christian, but I don't think you're being a Christian in this particular incident. I think you need to rethink what you're doing so that you can approach it through your faith, not through your culture or through your family or through your denomination or through uh, your socialization. Uh, I'm sorry, did I get off track there? Is that kind of where we're supposed to be
No,
going?
that's great. And I actually have an example. So I think that a lot of it has to do with dismissing people. So I don't know if you remember when Trump and JD Vance were at the National Cathedral, and the lady priest, she's Episcopalian, was giving
Right.
a speech about immigrants and about being loving and kind to all people. No one stood up and said what I would have said. You might not like her, you might not like where her church is going, you might not like their stance on a lot of subjects, but she had an opportunity to um, open up the conversation about um, having some humanity, about having some um, ethical treatment of others, about equal rights and stuff like that. And instead of that, everybody was just making fun of the way she looked and how she talked. And so undermining people instead of their ideas has become the norm.
Yeah.
And dismissing outright anyone because they're not part of your club is disgusting. It's
Oh,
unacceptable.
and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous because, I'm so happy for the 20 years of chaplaincy I've been able to do, because I realize how fragile we are as humans, and you've seen that in your work as well. We're fragile, and to dehumanize anyone uh, for their ideas or for their ethnicity or for their gender or for any particular characteristic, that is close to an act of war, because in order to fight wars, the enemy must be dehumanized. And I see Christ as a humanizing figure. I see Christ treating women well, foreigners well, criminals well, prostitutes well. I don't see the message of Christ as anyone being other. We're all God's creation, And yeah, I do believe that it's good to come to faith in Christ. But if you don't, you're still fully human and fully worthy of your opinions. You're fully worthy of your dignity, and you're fully worthy of your rights within our system or within any political system. And the danger of what they were doing is it's the first step towards dehumanizing that woman. And once you dehumanize someone, uh, it seems not immoral to harm them further to the point of shooting your enemy. And that's very dangerous, especially within the context of the nation state. Also, within the whole world, whenever there's been a war, they had to dehumanize the race or the creed or the beliefs of the enemy. But especially within your own uh, country, uh, civil wars are the worst kind of wars. And when you start to take away people's dignity, criticize them for not for their arguments or their beliefs, but for their physical characteristics, you've taken the first step towards dehumanizing them, and dehumanization is the next to last step of actual uh, actual harm and combat, I believe. So it's a very dangerous thing. I don't mind arguing with people on the merits of their argument, but I'm not going to dehumanize them uh, in any way in that discussion.
I'm going to bring up a controversial subject. So, another clip of Charlie Kirk, he's talking to a Christian and they're trying to figure out what does the conservative movement stand for. And Charlie Kirk says, um, anybody who agrees with our five main points or whatever is a conservative. And then the young evangelical kid says, well, what about someone who's part of the LGBTQ community? Can they still be conservative? And Charlie Kirk says yes, as long as they support those 5 points, lowering taxes, small government, um, whatever else they're into. And then the young man says, well, I'm sorry, but that's not cool with me. And then Charlie Kirk says, well, then you're not a real conservative. And then now Barry Wise has become the leader of the CBS, and she's the editor in chief, and she's a lesbian, and she says that her biggest concern is not gay rights, but it is lower taxes, and I guess
Mm-hmm.
support for Israel, whatever she's into. So, um, my friend and I were talking about that the conservative movement does the same thing as the progressive movement. They just throw a couple of bones to the Christian community, or in the case of the Democrats, they throw bones to the minorities. And then when they get empowered, they don't really live up to any of their ideals because they're more interested in winning. They're more interested in uh, being in power. But when it comes down to things that are consistent with the traditional perspective, they're willing to make all kinds of compromises, and they're more worried about rallying troops than they're worried about staying consistent. So it made us wonder if a lot of the Christian talk is performative, that is just pretending to be uh, committed when they're actually just to bring brownie points with their followers.
Okay, this is an opinion, and it may not be real charitable, but I think there are a lot of people in power who would throw any of their constituents under the bus if it meant they could keep power. And that's on the left, the right, and where I sometimes get really aggravated with the religious right is, don't you know that as soon as you're not useful, those people will toss you to the side, and they will. Not all of them. There are some sincere people in government in elected office, but the it's a universal and historical fact that once people are in power, they don't want to give it up. Sadly, I think these people like Joel Webben and Doug Wilson, I think that they are ascendant to power because of the current political climate. But quite honestly, I think they would be the first ones, chained to the wall, if they ever got in the way of the power of these people. And I think the same thing of minority and all minority communities. Everyone needs to be vigilant. Everyone of every stripe. Um, the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely, no matter who you are, uh, everyone has to be vigilant, no matter where they are on the political perspective, no matter what religion. And we need to be vigilant about our religious leaders and our political leaders, and even sort of the social, what they call thought leaders these days, which is a term a lot of people can't stand, but it works for this. I'm not, in my adult life, I've been very averse to hero worship. Um, there was this great man theory of history where history was formed by great men. Um, I'm I'm going to be skeptical of whoever is a leader. And even though I have leaders at work and in the church that I think very highly of, I'm not going to give them carte blanche because anytime you get authority, it can be abused. But I think you're right. I think if they became a threat to their power in any way, shape, or form, or if they started acting like real Christians, they'd toss them like yesterday.
So give us your profile of Doug Wilson. There, it's weird, like the internet doesn't really go into detail about how he got started and what's going on. And again, we're trying to educate people about these trends and these things that are coming up. And we would hate to see that his thing takes off. It's like, what would have people said about David Koresh before David Koresh became a thing? And there are some conspiracy theories that David Koresh wasn't that bad, that it was the FBI that bad-mouthed him and portrayed him as polygamist and rapist and all this stuff. But Doug Wilson has so much influence right now. He is well loved by the church that Peter Hegseth goes to. What are the things that made him popular, and why is he an important figure at this?
Well, if you listen to someone like Kristen Dumas, who I do respect greatly, um, she would say that there's been this sort of seething undercurrent of patriarchy in the evangelical church, and it has popped up through this uh, well, I'm going to that's the wrong term. The Rousas Rushdoony and the early late 20th century theocrats, and that his power has come from a lot of disaffected men who want to be uh, the head of their home. They want to be uh, respected, and they feel like society has taken that away from them. And I would say no one can take away your dignity unless you let them. But I think there's a big appeal for that. I think there's always been a latent desire for a Christian nation among some people, and he's brought a lot of those people out of the woodwork. Now he has a bigger voice than he does, bigger voice online than he does in real life. His church is rather large and growing in Moscow, Idaho. There are a lot of people in Moscow, Idaho, who are very unhappy with that church being there and are taking steps to counter any takeover of the town by Wilson and his followers. Same thing in Redding, California, with a completely different Christian group. Um, I'm blanking on the name of the church there, but it's a more Pentecostal group in Redding, California. And there's a lot of concern in Redding, California, that this church is taking over their town, and there's pushback against it. I don't think they're as popular as they think they are. I don't think they're as powerful as they think they are. However, I don't think there's any problem at all with critiquing them and being vigilant because, like you said, uh, uh, David Koresh's group was a small group and terrible things were happening inside that group. I mean, horrible things. Same thing with Jim Jones and the People's Temple. Jim Jones started out looking great. He was multicultural, totally diverse. Um, Started out in Indiana, and what a lot of people don't know is that the Klan was stronger in Indiana in the 20th century than most other states, Southern Indiana anyway. And Jim Jones stood up against the Indiana Klan, and people like that. But things turned bad fast when the power went to his head. I don't think they're as powerful as people give them credit for, but I don't think it's at all wrong to be vigilant about them or any other group. You remember Rabbi Meir Kahane. Uh, uh, a lot of people thought he was great, and a lot of people thought he was horrible. Um, Everyone needs to think critically about their religious leaders, whether they're Christian or Sikh or Muslim or Hindu. Uh, the core of the faiths. I know a lot of wonderful Muslim people. They're just regular, everyday people, don't have a mean bone in their body, but it's those people who have to critique and challenge their fundamentalist leaders. It's the same thing for Christians. There are run of the mill Christians who don't think about these things, but should and need to be vigilant and critique these people. I don't think they are as powerful as they come across. Wilson was a Southern Baptist. I don't think he has formal theological training. I believe his training is physics, which got to be pretty smart for that. I think he's more self-educated as a pastor, and I think a lot of these ideas came from uh, traditional Calvinism, Rushduni and his ilk. I think that's where he built it up, and he's found sympathetic people that feel disaffected by the rest of evangelicalism or the rest of Protestantism, and they've moved to Moscow, Idaho, to be part of his movement. My thoughts, anyway.
So the church in Redding, California, it's called Bethel, and
That's
they
right.
believe in the seven mountain mandate that uh, the Christians should influence government, media, business, and education in order to return Jesus to the earth. Um, when people say stuff like that, I think about, well, if it wasn't for Christianity and Islam, the world wouldn't be less idolatrous and less, it's more civilized, it's more humane and kind. So even though, you know, um, some of us in the Jewish community, we see Christianity as like the one side of the spectrum, and then Islam on the other. So
Mm-hmm.
Christianity is like the feminine, sweet, kind, loving, and
Mm-hmm.
then Islam is the masculine, strong, power oriented, and but and then they kind of swing back and forth because at one point Christianity became very dominant and overbearing, and at other times Islam was very intellectual and many things.
Yeah.
So you're looking at these sister religions as positive forces that have been kind of troubled. So then you say, okay, well, if someone wants to make the the U.S. more Christian, as long as it's a Christianity that it is open and friendly, that's good for the Jews. Just like an Islam that was open and friendly was good for the Jews, like in the Turkish Empire. So then
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, well, we can work with that. Now, the atheists and the pagans, stuff like that, I don't know if they're gonna like us. I don't know if they're gonna be fair to us. So overall, you can say, okay, well, we don't have a problem with this being a Christian nation in the sense of the majority of the population is Christian. The problem
Right.
is when it becomes fascistic, or when it becomes
Like
um,
totalitarianism. Yeah.
yeah, because then you mentioned that Hitler was a pagan. If you really look at the way he went about doing things, it had a lot of similarities to the Romans and the Inquisition and the medieval pogroms and stuff like that, because he was building it on conspiracies that resonated with the public. And
Right.
half of the public was Catholic and half of the public was Lutheran. Now, all the weird stuff about UFOs and secret societies and stuff like that, that was the minority groups that became very imaginary thinking, but everybody else had this disdain of Oriental people. Like that's why it's called anti-Semitism and it's not called uh, Jewish hatred, because Semites, like anything that was from the Orient, was seen as suspect. But so the problem is when it starts becoming sickening, when it becomes obsessive and hateful, kind of like the David Koresh thing, like hating the government to the point of trying to create your own kingdom in opposition to the US. So, but the overall perspective should be how can we work with these people? How can we show them a different way? And that's the problem when we start feeling threatened by these communities that are extremists, then the easiest thing to do is to condemn them fully to like they're racist, they're sexist, they're homophobic, they're anti-Semitic, and then the conversation is over. Like, and what I've seen lately is that people become even more entrenched, even more um, countercultural, the more you attack them. So they instead of saying, okay, well, let's discuss, what are you really talking about? So one thing that I did, I was listening to Judge Webben, and he came across to me as like very thoughtful and very like I don't know, like they have this weird sense of intellectualism. You see that a lot with traditionalist Catholics. They're always smoking a cigar and drinking brandy and trying to pretend that they're professors and stuff. And then they have these like very elaborate ideas, almost like one of the characters from Inglourious Bastards, like the Gestapo guy, where they're
Yeah,
they're very sophisticated, but sophisticated to their folly. So
yeah,
so so Webben was talking about how if you think about Calvin and Luther and the way that they wanted to do a Christian nation state, that they were doing it for the sake of the people, and that wouldn't you want Christians as the people leading you? Because if you get Bill Clinton or George Bush or somebody who's like kind of weak in their faith, you're gonna have bad results. You need people who are resolute in their commitment to Christ, and that they're gonna have a Christian understanding of the world. So it was very attractive the way that he put it out, but then he starts going, that's why we need to get rid of the Jews. And it's like, whoa, 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 man, like where did it go from we need to have virtuous people serving in government to we need to kick the Jews out? And he never said exterminate, but he was kind of like pointing in that direction. um how would you relate to that?
well, there's two things. I don't consider myself an intellectual. I've had the benefit of a good broad education from bachelor's through PhD, but I don't consider myself an intellectual. A lot of my training was very practical, and my PhD work was more uh, cultural uh, cultural effects of uh, on higher education. I don't know if I ever told you I did my dissertation down in Tampico, where I interviewed engineering professors and students about the changes brought by NAFTA to the engineering profession and training in Mexico, which is a very boring subject. So that's my PhD. So I really can't claim to know much about anything. And that was 20 plus years ago. So I can't even claim to be an expert on that anymore. So as a non intellectual, one of the things I look for in intellectuals that I want to learn from and follow are the opposite of those guys. I'd like to see good documentation, whether it's historical sources or whether it's statistical empirical analysis. And I'd like to see consistency of thought throughout the argument. Well, the idea that Christians would be great rulers and then turn around and say, but we got to kick out all the other people or we got to subjugate all the other people, that's a contradiction. I mean, it's a total contradiction because good rulers are just to everyone and and provide justice and fairness under the law, punish crime and delinquency under the law, and exalt and lift up virtuous citizens. You don't make someone a criminal just because of their religion or their ethnicity. So I see inconsistencies like that in their arguments. The other thing I see is, and I'm not going to say they're not Christians because I don't know. They may deep down have a deep faith. They're just on a fad, a theological or an intellectual fad, or maybe they're not that bright. Doug Wilson's a smart man, I will say. I don't know about the other guys. Doug Wilson, I feel, is just following an intellectual current that he won't let go of. Guys like Webben, I don't know. I don't know where they're coming from. I can speculate. But if they talk about those kind of inconsistencies, and you can find them in anyone's arguments if you search long enough, even good scholars. But I just don't see them as intellectual thought leaders. And what I would do, speaking directly to you, David, you know the New Testament better than a lot of Christians do. And I would say, you know the New Testament better than most evangelicals do. I had the privilege of having supper with Harold Kushner some years ago, and he knew the New Testament as well as I did, or better. And if you truly want to gently correct these folks, quote the New Testament to them because it contradicts everything they're talking about. Quote the words of Christ about how his kingdom is not of this world. Even go back to the Torah against idolatry. They've made idols of power, they've made idols of political systems. And if you can gently, and then some people are never going to listen, but if you can, in an honest intellectual conversation, quote those passages from both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament that really show that they're on the wrong track, you might win some people over. Honestly, if I were a Christian nationalist and I sat down with you in a restaurant and you started quoting the appropriate passages from the New Testament to me, as I know you could do, I'd be embarrassed. I would say, oh man. Now, I'm 63 years old. I've had some of my cockiness knocked off of me in the last 63 years. So I'm a lot more humble these days than I would have been 20 years ago. But at this point in my life, if I were a Joel Webben or a Doug Wilson acolyte and you and I sat down for lunch next time I'm over your way, and you started to quote the New Testament to me and showed me how I'm out to lunch following these guys, I would fold like a bad suit. I'd say, yeah, you're right. You're right. Not everyone will do that, but it might plant the seed.
Okay, Tom. So we're gonna end with that. So, Tucker Carlson, who's neither a theologian nor a spokesperson for the Christian people, he's going around hardcore attacking the idea that the Jews are the chosen people, and other people have made fun of Ted Cruz saying that. Well, it was him. He was saying to Ted Cruz, "How can you say you support Israel because if you bless Abraham, you're blessed or whatever." So I'm gonna quote Romans 9 and tell me if my interpretation is correct, since you are a faithful Christian, a priest, and a devout, member of the Christian community. So tell me if this makes any sense. So Paul says about Israel, which this is the problem. Like Abraham's descendants were called Hebrew Israelites or Jews. So to
Mm-hmm.
say that if you bless Abraham, you bless the Jews, then it's the same thing. To claim that the state of Israel is not Jewish would be nuts because it's 70% Jewish, and they took the name Israel because they see themselves as the land of Israel, and Israel as a whole, as the Jewish people, are the dominant group. But this is what he says of the Jewish people of his time. They are Israelites. To them belongs the election, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and for their race, according to the flesh, is the Christ, who's God over all, blessed forever. Amen. So, if you follow the Greco-Roman understanding that the new Israel are the followers of Jesus from all different nations, wouldn't that contradict what Paul said? Because he's calling them Israelites, and he's saying that Israel will be saved in the future time, and that right now they don't understand or they're blinded. But so he's applying it to the non-believing Jews, and then later him or someone else applies it to all Israel, being all the followers of Jesus. So that's where Tucker and other people get their ammo to say, don't go around saying that Israel are the chosen people or the elect. We're the elect, and they are imposters. So then when he says all Israel will be saved, is he talking about the Christians or is he talking about the Jews? Because
I've always I've
goes in
always
circles.
thought, okay, and I'll be honest with you, I have not studied. I know that passage, but I've not studied it in detail. Um, I was in my upbringing in the Christian faith. There were some teachings that all of Israel would be saved. Some teachings. Uh, some people shied away from that a little bit, but in my training all through seminary, I went to church when I was 3 days old. Starting to sound like Paul giving his Jewish credentials. First time I went to church, I was 3 or 4 days old. Went all the way through Christian college, studied the Bible, studied psychology, went to seminary. All of that education from day 3 or 4 of my life up until graduating from seminary and beyond, I was told that God always has a plan for Israel, and that the Jewish people, as Caspar ten Boom, the father of Corrie ten Boom, who was famous for hiding Jews in Holland during World War II, said the Jews are the apple of God's eye. I have always been taught and always felt that the Jews have a special place in God's economy. And it's not for me to say what that is, but it's a good thing. It's not for me to theologically necessarily say what Paul meant by that. I should study that further. But it's always been my belief, and will continue to be my belief, that there is special honor to the Jewish people because they brought us the Abrahamic religion. And as a Christian, they brought us who we believe to be the Messiah. If Jewish people don't believe that, well, I'm fine with that. I want people to be who they are. I don't want people to have a false belief or say something. I want people to believe what they believe. But I will always believe that there is a special place, not necessarily in future prophecy, like some of the dispensational theology says. Could be. I could be wrong about that. And I was listening to a rabbi on a lecture not too long ago, and he was talking a little bit about anti-Semitism. And he says, I don't know why they get so upset about us being the chosen people. It wasn't an easy ride. And I realized the Jewish people weren't just called to be special. They were called to a very, very difficult historical purpose. And I have the deepest of respect for them because of that, as well as I have deep respect for other ethnicities. But because I'm a Christian, it's a little more close to home for the Jewish people.
There's multiple pastors who are bringing back the Judaizer heresy, and that's what Tucker
Mm-hmm.
Carlson was saying in that clip. That he was saying that if you believe that that the Jews are chosen, you're a heretic, because the ones that are chosen are the Christians. And I know Jesus said, "Many are called and few are chosen," but the the foundation of Christianity is that the covenants were given to a specific group of people, and we in the Jewish community know that they were from many nations because of different things that happen. So some of it is through the line of Abraham, but not all of it. Even
Mm-hmm.
Zipporah, the wife of Moses, wasn't Jewish. The
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
wives of King David weren't Jewish. The his grandmother wasn't Jewish. Like there was a lot of people who joined, kind of like Ruth. My people would be your people. My people, your people would be my people, and your God would be my God. So it was just like Christianity and Islam. It allowed other people to join. So they get obsessed with this ethnic DNA thing that unless you can prove that you're Semitic, you're not a real Jew, and they're coming after Eastern European Jews and everybody else and stuff. So they get to define us, and then they get to undermine us by using theological claims that are very old and very dismissive. And the correct term is not even anti-Semitic; it's Judeophobic, because
Mm-hmm.
they were created by the church fathers who were from the other nations and had a lot of disdain for the Jews because they had gone against the Romans. So they used these ideas that the we're done with the Jews have no purpose, the Jews are scheming, the Jews are undermining Christianity, and now is being brought into the political fray in what I would call the modern political anti-Semitism, where the nation of the state of Israel cannot be trusted. All the leaders are corrupt. All the Jews who support it are spies or don't have enough allegiance for the U.S. and stuff like that. So they just keep building it up to the point of stirring up so much hatred, and they think they understand what Jesus stood for. They think that they are talking on behalf of the apostles, but in the more research that I do, Paul's relationship to the rest of the Jews was very complicated because
Hmm.
sometimes he would blow us kisses, and sometimes he would slap us, and sometimes he would just straight out condemn us. And he had a very narrow perspective on who was in and who was out. And even Jesus was like, well, if you're not against me, you're with me. So I like that approach a little bit better because you're demanding something that even in Christian perspective comes from within. That unless you have the revelation of who Jesus is, unless you have the Holy Spirit speak to you, whatever, you will never be able to fully embrace it, because I thought it wasn't a mental thing, it was a spiritual thing. Um,
Yeah.
so to put this this almost like stigma on all Jews because they're distinct, because they're unique, because they have a particular perspective on what the Messiah is supposed to look like. And the one thing that upsets me the most is the idea that everybody wanted a like a warrior Messiah, because
Yes.
the idea of a warrior Messiah is one idea, but the ultimate idea is that the Messiah is going to bring peace to the rest of the world. So one of the issues for seeing Jesus as a contender for that role is that he didn't bring everlasting peace, and what we call tikkun olam. So that's the real issue. It has nothing to do with Jesus' claims or Jesus' birth or Jesus' nature. It has to do with completing the the promise and the so, but Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, there's Bruce Mejia, uh, there's Tucker, and a bunch of other people saying that the Jews are so illegitimate and so ridiculous that they're ranching up the accusation that we're like the enemies of God and the enemies of Christianity, uh, to the point of um, paranoia that that Jews can't do anything right, and if they do something, is for their own gain, and it is like the roots of Nazism. Like it's this idea that the global Jew is trying to destroy America. Um, as a Christian, who you mentioned, the way that some Christians, which were only a few, supported the Jews during the Nazi regime. Um, Other than your love for the Bible and your understanding, how would you communicate the importance of not holding those grudges? Because uh, even if you made a case that the Jews were the ones that killed Jesus, didn't Jesus say that forgive them for they don't know what they do, and wasn't preordained? So how can, like, do you see it as like they're just grasping at straws to build up a narrative of hatred, or do they actually have a strong case based on the church fathers' understanding of what went down?
I don't believe they have a case at all. Uh, and a completely non-Christian thought about the role of the Jewish people. Look at the Hebrew Bible. I don't care if you're religious or not. That's an amazing piece of literature. Look at all the contributions of Jewish people throughout the ages. Think about Maimonides, the philosopher physician in Spain. Look at all the Nobel Prize winners. Um, I have an issue with the current government of Israel, but let's say 3-4 years ago, if I'm flying a plane and it starts to conk out over the Eastern Mediterranean, and am I going to point towards Syria or am I going to point towards Israel? If I want, if I need proper medical care, proper humane care, and nothing against the Syrians, it was just a mess. Even, and a lot of that was because of outside intervention. But I'm going to aim my plane towards Tel Aviv because I know the Jewish people know how to take care of things. So, from a totally secular point of view, I see everything the Jewish people have done through history as a net positive for humanity. Why would I? Why would I be against them, even if I weren't a Christian? All I see coming from the Jewish community, and of course, every ethnicity, every group has their criminals, has their villains, has all that. But as a whole, everything the Jewish people have brought to the world has been a net positive for civilization and society. Why would I be against that? And as a Christian, uh, my scriptures are the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And even the grand majority of the New Testament was written by Jewish people. Now, they may have been Christian converts, but it was written by Jewish people. Why would I be against the people who brought me my scriptures? I just don't understand it.
I have a
It's
very
old. Yeah.
controversial thing to say, and I want to get your opinion.
Okay.
So I think the Jewish people have become very bratty and very like self oriented, and the
Mm-hmm.
Christian community has become very paganized and very loosey goosey with their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I can say that is because I see it in the sense of you know how the reason there's a backlash against the secular world and the non-believers is because there's rampant immorality and there's all kinds of cultural issues. But if the Christians were actually doing their job and they live virtuous lives, they wouldn't be that worried about what their kids are experiencing and the way that the culture is going, because they would be at least you can't control how some things pan out, but at least you set a good foundation and you expect for people to maybe in their older age to come to understanding, to better understanding. And with the Jewish community, we have built our identity culturally, nationalistically, or racially, and we have forgotten about the true foundation, which is the commandments of God and the love of our neighbor, which it not only includes other Jews, but all humanity. So unless we can both get back to the roots, which is the teachings of Jesus or the teachings of the patriarchs, the world's going to keep on getting crazier. And instead of being self-reflective and focusing on ourselves, we're fighting everybody else and blaming everybody else for our own problems. And that's where the people who attack Judaism have a point when they say, well, you can't just say everything's anti-Semitic. Um, if you're living a virtuous life, if you're standing up for the rights of others, if you're trying to bring peace between different nations, then when people attack you, they attack you unfairly. But if you're so set in this is just our way and nobody can get in between what we want, then they have something to complain about and then immediately say you're being anti-Semitic. Just like when we started the conversation and you were saying that Christians claim to be persecuted, when how can they be claimed to be persecuted when this is the most free and peaceful place for Christians to practice their faith? And that's why I love liberalism in the sense of just let me do my thing and mind your own business. As long as I pay my taxes and I am a good citizen, I can worship whatever I want and I can worship any way I want. And I can't go around crying wolf and claiming that everybody's trying to kill me when this is a free society. And there's already laws that protect us from persecution. So to have this, made up monster that is chasing you, just like they've been doing with Islam, they've been saying that Muslims are trying to take over and stuff like that. They won't even let them build a mosque without a bunch of people giving them a hard time. So we know that there's injustices, but it will never be what people paint things to be. Um, and just because we get more entrenched or more aggressive, that all that is going to do is make people hate us even more.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place for me to end, because anyone who challenges me to live more in tune with the teachings of Jesus Christ has given me a gift. And I will always remember when people say, it's not that kind of silly tagline, what would Jesus do? But is this in line with Jesus' teaching? Is it? If it's not, I shouldn't be messing with it. So that's a good word for me.
Well, we want to thank Tom for his patience and his ability to give us a Christian perspective on what's going on. Again, if we are self-reflective, then we can criticize our own groups. And I work with military families, and sometimes I say, "Hey, I don't like the way that they're training people to be killing machines or taking away their humanity, or the system is not helpful towards victims or people who are struggling." And if they get mad and they say, "How dare you question the U.S. government and the military forces?" I tell them the reason I'm questioning is because I care. If I didn't care, I would say do whatever you want. But because I care and I want reforms to happen to bring better results, and I want people to not be struggling with PTSD the rest of their lives, and to feel that they were dismissed once they used them to be part of a war, or whatever, then that's why I have the right to bring to attention things that can be worked on. And the same would be for our faith communities. If I didn't care about the Jewish community, I wouldn't criticize it. If I didn't care about the Christian community, I wouldn't criticize it. And whenever we have people who come and criticize Islam, I will turn it on them. I had a young man who was, uh, you know, kind of really beating up on the Muslims, and I said, well, that's the atheist perspective, but what about spiritual perspective, and what about this and that? And we've also criticized the communists, the atheists, all kinds of different things, because what we want is to come to a better understanding. So again, we thank you for your time. It's been a very enlightening conversation, and it's easy to despair. It's easy to feel like these groups are taking over, and there's this totalitarian thing going on, dictatorship going on. But there's been some pushback that has actually worked, and there's been some awareness to, if you let them, they can go as far as they want. But we as a society, we need to stand up for what is right. And in our spiritual perspective, the one that we're accountable is God, and He has very clear understanding of what justice is, what love, what peace and comfort and the things that we're seeking are. So I don't want anybody to be confused. And that's really what I feel, is that when the political ideas take over, they muddy the waters, and then people are just worried about what side do I need to jump on, versus we need to stand strong in our faith.
Well, thank you so much, David. Looking forward to seeing you the next time I'm over there. I'll get in touch, let you know when I'll be in town.
Thank you, brother. Talk to you soon, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. Thank you.
God bless.
God bless.